He's a leading authority on Judy Garland, and we'll talk about his latest book, Judy, A Legendary Film Career. Author John Fricke is my special guest next on I Remember. Hi, I'm Jim Peck. Welcome to I Remember. Joining me tonight is John Fricke. He's an author, a film historian, and a performer as well. He's back visiting his hometown of Milwaukee, giving us the opportunity to find out how he came to know so much about one particular entertainer who made her feature film debut 75 years ago. Take a look.
See whoopsie, if you will meet me in St. Louis, meet me at the fair.
Judy Garland was already an MGM star when Meet Me in St. Louis came out in 1944.
Ding, ding, ding went the bell.
Born Frances Gum in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, she made her stage debut at the age of 2. Growing up in show business, she had changed her name by the time she made her 1936 feature film debut in Pigskin Parade. Judy received a special Juvenile Academy Award for her 1939 classic portrayal as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Years later, John Fricke, a boy in Milwaukee, saw the film and became a fan of Judy Garland and all things Oz. He's written 3 books on the history of The Wizard of Oz and is a popular speaker at Oz festivals. He's also the author of 2 previous books on Judy and is a 2-time Emmy Award winner for his work on PBS and A&E documentaries about Garland. In the 1970s, John worked in public relations at the Melody Top Theater in Milwaukee. He met a number of stars who performed in musicals under the big tent at the Summer Stock Theater. Fricke loves a good song and has starred in his own one-man concerts. As a teenager, he performed in high school musicals. He was a teen when he saw Judy Garland in concert. Seeing her live performance and meeting her backstage is something he'll never forget. John Fricke is an authority on the renowned singer and her work on stage, screen, radio, and television. His 3rd book on Garland includes hundreds of photographs, some never before published, as well as behind-the-scenes stories and production histories of her movies. His latest tribute to the entertainer is Judy, A Legendary Film Career.
Is it true that you were actually in a theater one night during a performance when a skunk ambled down the corridor and went up on stage?
Oh, that was at the Melody Top. Sure, in the round, the tent.
And that really happened?
For people who remember 72nd and Good Hope Road, when Eline Field was next door, and the tent went up every spring for 14 weeks, it was Joanne Worley and Hello Dolly. And she said they were in the middle of the first act in the Hatbox scene, and they saw people, you know, kind of going like a little whoop, 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 down the row. And this skunk had wandered in because of all the popcorn. The Melody Top was not, you know, the Palladium. That was a little bit informal.
Oh, yeah.
And there was
open.
popcorn, and the skunks would come in. But this one just was not scared of anybody, and he came right down on the stage, took one look around, and let loose on Mrs. Malloy. And as Joanne said, you don't do that to the ingenue. You might do that to the character woman, but not. So they had to take Mrs. Malloy off and put her in a new dress and have an extra intermission. But
and air the place out a little bit.
That too.
Oh my God, that was that was at Melody Top. Talk a little bit about, before we go to Judy,
Oh,
talk
sure.
a little bit of Melody Top, because it was a fascinating place.
Well, 63 to, I think, 85 or 86, something like that. And it was in the round on Good Hope Road. And it was a summer theater. It was first done in conjunction with a sister theater in Chicago. They do the shows there and bring them here. We do them here and take them there.
Oh, okay. I didn't know
But
that.
that one folded in 3 years. And Elmer Regner and some local people, Bill Luff, got together and decided, no, this is too good for Milwaukee. And Milwaukee, God love it, has a passion for music and for theater.
Embrace Melody Top.
Yeah, and so they started putting the shows on by themselves. And in the 70s, when I was there, under Marty Wiviet, Ann Dorzinski, Louis Friedman, people like that, Dickie Turner, I did the PR, which meant I met the stars at the airport. I arranged for them to be on TV with you at Channel 4.
I remember that.
On Dialing for Dollars, which was the step up.
Thank you a lot. Yes,
you're welcome.
I needed that.
Howard and Rosemary, they were the top.
They were.
But we did all that, and it was a great deal of fun, because the musicals, of the 7 they did every summer, you could count on 4 being really, really good, and 2 being not to everybody's taste, but also good.
Now, they brought in some top-flight entertainment.
Oh, Yeah, and then there was always one ringer in there, but that's the seventh, and we don't. That was Sheila McRae in Wonderful Town, but we won't mention any names.
Oh, yes, right. I remember that one too.
They were all a lot of TV people, but who had gotten their start on stage, so they weren't, you know, floundering around out there. We had Leonard Nimoy, Mr. Spock, in My Fair Lady, Oliver, The King and I, Artie Johnson from Laugh-In.
What was he like, Nimoy?
They were all very down to earth, which was lovely because they were working in a tent in, you know, next to a polo field outdoors in Milwaukee. You can't give a lot of attitude.
With skunks.
Yeah, and no air conditioning and rain on the canvas and.
Oh, isn't there a story about somebody climbing up on a ladder?
That was Robert Q. Lewis.
Was.
They when the tent was, they eventually went to a hardtop dome. But the many years it was just the tent, and when the rain would beat down on that canvas, you were like in an oil drum.
Yep.
And Robert Q. Lewis and Jerry Dodge, who were doing the leads in How to Succeed in Business with Karen Morrow, Bobby Q called for a step ladder, and he and Jerry Dodge climbed up either side of the step ladder to the hanging mics over the stage, and they ad-libbed their way through the rainstorm.
Oh my!
Until, you know, the storm had passed and the show could be heard.
There was a predecessor, and you probably won't remember this, to Melody Top. It was called Melody Circus Theater. It was out on Port Road. That was before 43 was built. It was out near Port Washington, and it was in a field. It was a tent, and I can remember I was in a play, and it was Carousel. And at one point, the actor, somebody says, "It's a beautiful night," and he looks up and says, "Not a cloud in the sky." And with that came a crash of thunder and a downburst of. And it was exactly what you said. Nobody could hear anything.
Oh, no, you can't. And nights there were tornado warnings. Poor Marty would get an ulcer thinking, do I cancel the show, or we're in the middle of the show, do I stop it and send them home? I can't send them out to their cars if there's a tornado in Waukesha coming this way. So it was always exciting. But again, the entertainment value, and I think the ticket top, you know, was something like $6 or $7.
Probably.
And again, Joanne Worley, Dorothy Collins, Margaret Whiting, Barry Williams from the Brady Bunch in Oklahoma, or Pippin. It was really good value. It was really good entertainment.
Van Johnson.
Yes.
I got to interview Van Johnson.
Jane Powell, Ann Blythe, a lot of old MGM people, which was right up my psychic alley because I was, you know, born in 1950, but I was this 20s and 30s and 40s kid somehow. So Van was funny because when I didn't meet his plane. I was doing something else the night before. But I did pick him up at the hotel the next morning to take him out to the theater. He'd never been there before and needed directions. And he said, he called me John. Don't I? John, you can ask me anything you want, but nothing about Judy Garland. Because they had prepped him, you know, that was going to be the major quiz.
That's funny.
Oh, we ended up working together 3 times. I saw him in New York when he'd do benefits, in Vegas once.
Did anything surprise you when you met him for the first time? I have a reason for asking that.
He was very bawdy and very blue in his own way, and you know, nothing fazed him.
No.
I mean, he didn't care. He was a wonderful entertainer, but you know, he had this theory that people love to hear a star swear, and so he would drop these things in public. Now, in 1971, you still were getting used to hearing hell and damn on TV. Never mind in the lobby at Channel 4.
And some of the things
I've got Van Johnson stories that we cannot do on the air. But the minor thing, when I would take him to Howard and Rosemary, I would be about to introduce him to them, and he would say, "Hello, I'm Van Johnson, and this is John. John is my illegitimate son by Grace Coolidge. Now, where the heck's the studio?" And away he'd go. And they would look at me, and I would look at them, and it was like a force of nature.
Yes, he really was. And he was a big man.
Oh, 6'1" or 4 or something, yeah.
And shoulders out to here. I was not ready for that. We'll come back to that. I want to talk a little bit about Judy Garland.
We do a whole series of these.
We could. In fact, you can come back next week.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Judy Garland, I was very surprised to find out that Somewhere Over the Rainbow almost didn't get into the movie.
Oh,
Wizard
that's
of
true.
Oz.
That's true.
It is.
They thought it happened too early in the film. You know, it's in the first 10 minutes. It was a ballad, slows things down. Why is our MGM starlet singing in a barnyard? This is not seemly. And I think in those days, too, some things never changed. You had people who had nothing to do with the film who were at MGM, but who wanted to have their fingerprints. So I made them cut that song, or I made them add this, or retake that. And it previewed once with Over the Rainbow, and then they all went to the second preview, and where Miss Gulch is about to come in after the song, all of a sudden there's no song, and Miss Gulch is just there. But the dumb thing is, without Over the Rainbow, that's really the only song she has in the film.
Yeah.
a Judy Garland musical without a Judy Garland song. And then all that underscoring would have had no impact at all because they used the tune, the melody, all the way through the film. So...
Well, it sets the whole scene.
And it's the whole premise of the film. But then again, there were people at MGM, you know, Dory Sherry came in later on, and when they made Annie Get Your Gun, which builds to the big shooting match between Annie and Frank to prove that, you know, she's going to give it all up for the man she loves. Well, they went to preview, everybody loved it, but Dory Sherry said, well, we can cut out that shooting match at the end. And it's kind of like, well, there goes
the whole thing.
Yeah, what plot there is, that's it.
Did Judy Garland like that movie?
Oh, very much.
She did.
I think she knew how important it was. I think the best example I can give, 25 years after Oz was in the early 60s when she was coming back, and by dint of talent, the biggest star in the world, Carnegie Hall, Judgment at Nuremberg, the TV specials, the TV series. And when she started her TV series, Mel Torme had been hired to write special material for her. And he and the writers got together and thought, oh, for the first episode, Judy, this is great. We've got a great parody of Over the Rainbow for you to do. And she drew herself up to her full 4 feet 11 inches.
She was tiny.
Yeah, and she said, you've got to be kidding. She said, there are going to be no jokes of any kind on this program about Over the Rainbow. I don't want anybody anywhere to lose the thing they have about Dorothy and that song. Which is kind of nifty. You know, she appreciated it. But she was an appreciator. One thing I found by dint of being a fan since I was 5 and researching her for my own pleasure for decades, long before there were going to be books or documentaries or CDs or DVDs, all the stuff I've been lucky to do, over and over, that's what you would hear. So much counter to the legend that anybody who really knew her or spent time with her, how warm, how bright, how compassionate, how comprehending, besides the energy and the talent and the charisma and everything else.
And yet she had such a sad life.
Well, the tack I take there is 2 components. Lorna Luft, her daughter, who's the member of the family with whom I've spent time. If you're
Not Liza?
Lorna Luft is the member of the family with whom I've spent time.
How delicately said, John.
Liza, you know, Liza's never asked, you know, so that's fine. But Lorna's on record. She said, look, yes, tragic things happened to my mother, but she was not a tragedy. And one of the first books written about Judy, even before she died, the author was interviewed at that occasion when she had passed, and he said, you know, there's so much in the paper now about her, and it's all disproportionate. He said, you know, yes, she married more than once, and yes, she had a prescription medication substance abuse problem, and yes, she died young. But there are all kinds of people who marry more than once and have substance abuse problems and die young, and that's what they do with their life. But when you realize that she worked 45 of her 47 years, and as an entertainer from age 2, and we've got footage of her from age 7 until 3 months before she died. So it's, you know, 40 years of coverage. It isn't just that she was effective then in Meet Me in St. Louis and Wizard of Oz and Star is Born and the TV specials and the recordings and the radio shows and the concerts. It isn't just that she got the best reviews that anybody could get during her time. She's one of the few entertainers of that era who is still palatable today. This is why there are DVDs. This is why there is Turner Classic Movies. This is why I'm able to do a 3rd book on her in 19 years, not counting the 3 on Wizard of Oz. I was joking with Jane, your producer, on the phone the other day, and I said I always kid that it's very lucky that at age 5 I fell for Judy Garland, because if I'd fallen for Connie Francis, I would have had no future whatsoever, you know?
No,
and now you're going to get a lot of mail from Italians about that, but
no,
you know what I'm saying.
But how did you get... Oh, the pictures in here are some of I've never seen before of Judy.
Well, that's the idea. Now, each book...
How'd you get that stuff?
Well, good luck. A lot of collecting on my own over the years, but one thing that has been very flattering through all of this, all the projects, is that other Garland fans who really genuinely venerate her and feel about her the way I do have come to me after each project has happened and said, look, I like what you're doing, we like what you're doing, anything we have you can use. And so I've been able to draw on the archives of many, many people who have spent much more time actually and actively collecting than I have. Collecting is an expensive proposition, and while this stuff is a life, it's not necessarily a living. And so I go to
You don't have a penthouse overlooking
I live in the
East River?
same one-room studio apartment on 45th and 8th in Manhattan that I moved into 37 years ago.
Aw.
Block from, oh no, it's a block from Times Square. There are 9 Broadway theaters on the street. When I open my windows now since January, the Hirschfeld Theater is right across the street, and 11:15 every night, Danny Radcliffe, Harry Potter, comes out of the How to Succeed stage door, and I hear the screaming and the yelling, and it's worth it to live in New York. But you remember the Irving Berlin song, Always? Mm-hmm. I'll be loving you all. My best friend in New York says that the theme song of John Fricke's apartment is, I'll be loving you sideways.
Step outside to change your mind.
Yeah.
When did you fall in love with Judy Garland?
November 3rd, 1956.
Whoa.
First telecast of The Wizard of Oz, CBS. Sorry.
It's okay.
But,
just use the initials.
You've done this before, I can tell. Yeah, and I was prone to passion for music. My dad was a quintessential athlete at Boys Tech, Milwaukee State Teachers, but he was an elementary school teacher. My mom was an elementary school teacher. They loved music, so when that was my bent, I was encouraged. I had a little phonograph, all the Disney records, which were musical comedy stuff. Mary Martin as Peter Pan, Julie Andrews as Cinderella, all that great musical theater that was done on TV in the 50s for families. So I was primed for Oz, but I did not expect it to, kick me the way it did. And when I found out in succeeding weeks after the telecast that Judy Garland made other records besides Wizard of Oz, which they got me pronto, that she made other movies, that there was a series of 40 Oz books, it wasn't just the one story, all of a sudden it was like, yeah, I've got a hobby, I'm set now. I don't know if any of the librarians from the 50s and 60s are still around here in Milwaukee, but they could tell you stories about the crazy little redhead kid who was never over looking for Curious George finds a hoo-ha. I was always over looking at the Milwaukee Journal for 1939 to look at the original ads for the Riverside Theater for the first engagement of Wizard of Oz.
Well, you were an odd little boy, John. But seriously, now you're at John Marshall High School.
Yes.
I mean, what did kids say about you?
Well, I got kidded about it, but you have to remember, as much as the 60s were the turmoil and the tumult and the transition, that kind of music, musical theater, musical movies, Sound of Music, Mary Poppins, Thoroughly Modern Millie, Funny Girl, those were all 60s movies and all big hits. Top of the charts, Louis Armstrong, Hello Dolly, Jack Jones, The Impossible Dream, Edie Gourmet, If He Walked Into My Life, Sammy Davis, I've Gotta Be Me. This was all still valid cross-the-boards mainstream entertainment. So I didn't get kidded as much as I probably would have 10, 20, 30 years later. And Garland was viable. Again, you don't get your own CBS network series unless you're pretty important.
But the television series never really worked for her. Why not?
Because CBS kept changing it on her. There's a great quote, never before published, from Mike Dan, who was vice president in charge of programming at the time. And we interviewed him about 6 years ago for something else, and he said it was our fault. He said we kept imposing on her things that were foreign to her. We kept trying. One of the critics at the time said, they bought Judy Garland because she was a star, and then they wouldn't let her be one. They tried to make her Gary Moore and Dinah Shore and very folksy.
It was like, dragged poor Jerry Van Dyke into that.
And it was like,
awful.
Get all that junk out of the way and let her sing. Because when she sang, it was majestic. Yeah. And so, anyway, I'm glad you mentioned John Marshall, because they were right across the street from where we lived on 66th and Hope at the time. And we moved, there was a field. 2 years later, there was the biggest 6-year high school in the state of Wisconsin.
Wow.
And my brother and sister and I all went there, 7th through 12th, and got so much of our background and training there. Now, one of the reasons I'm here in Milwaukee right now is to work with the John Marshall student faculty alumni group. There's going to be a book signing here. Proceeds will go to the scholarship fund.
There's a lot of famous people come out of John Marshall.
Yeah, so many good teachers, so many good facilities. I mean, I went back to look at it this year for the first time in 30 years. The classrooms were as you think. They all looked smaller. The auditorium still looked bigger than life. And that's where I played Harold Hill in The Music Man in 1967, and John Rait's part in The Pajama Game the next year. And so to work with Marshall now and to tie in what celebrity I have and help the school, tangentially anyway, And they want me to come back. They're bringing a lot of the alumni back to talk to the classes because it is the Samuel Morse John Marshall School for the Gifted and the Arts now. And so they want to bring back that kind of level of passion and communication, whether written, performed, however, that Marshall was really known for. But as you say, you think of Steve Peterman, who won Emmys as a writer and producer on Murphy Brown, and then did a Brooke Shields show and works for the Disney Channel. Jeff Gordon worked on Family Matters, the TV series, ended up as an executive at MGM. And these were Patty Lowe in Madison on TV, and books.
Mike Goucher.
Mike Goucher. He was after me, which is why I don't instantly think, much younger than I see. Much like you.
Yeah.
And
sure.
It's easier all the time.
Yes.
But yeah, I think of all those kinds of people. And
didn't you do, or am I hallucinating again? A one-man show?
Oh God, that's when I was at Marshall. There was the play one semester and the musical the other semester, and then the choir. Well, when you are laced through and through with ham, that's not enough. And I put together a one-man show that started to tour nursing homes and hospitals and senior centers when I was still at Marshall.
Captive
audience. And they would take any kind of entertainment they could get. Mm-hmm. That was me. But also, I could go in there and sing Alexander's Ragtime Band and Always and Gershwin, and because they loved that music, and I did too. Well, that snowballed because by the 70s, 1975, say, I was working at Melody Top doing PR. I had just graduated journalism at Northwestern, but I was still coming home every summer and singing 50 or 60 shows to the seniors in the summer, and then another 30 at Christmas when I'd come home. And it expanded to men's clubs, women's clubs. People heard me with the seniors and asked me to other places, which was very nice. Well, all the little old ladies got out their pens and paper and wrote to the Melody Top and said, when are you going to put him in a show? We come to the Melody Top and he comes to us and we want to come there and see him. And Marty Wiviet, God bless him, said, well, I can't, John, you can't dance. You can't blend vocally. You're not much of an actor. I can't.
Other than that, you're fine.
I can't put you in a show. He said, but if you come back in 1976, we'll give you, the theater was dark every Monday night. Mm-hmm. He said, we'll give you a dark night. Put together a show. Whoa. So I went back to New York that fall, and with a friend from Northwestern, who was also in New York, a conductor, arranger, we put together a 47-song, 2.5-hour, one-man concert.
On purpose?
Well, once they were going to give me the stage, I wasn't going to relinquish it,
Yes.
And
it ran into Tuesday.
The next summer, they gave me a dark Monday in August, and those little ladies chartered buses. They had John Fricke signs.
Oh, I love it.
But a week before the show, they had sold out all 2,156 seats.
Seriously?
50 standing room and 50 folding chair. It was the largest single audience in the history of Melody Top. Margaret Whiting, whom I knew from her jobs at the tent, mm-hmm. and who knew about Judy and me. Margaret always referred to herself as John Fricke's favorite living singer. And Margaret flew in as a surprise to me to introduce the show.
Oh, why?
Yeah. And then the next year we did 43 different songs and did 2 nights at the Pabst. Came back and did that again a few years later at the Pabst, did the Senior Citizen Grandstand Day at the Wisconsin State Fair.
Are you still doing these things, by the way?
Not much, no, because, if you're going to sing, you got to kind of keep, now I would sound like a hinge, you got to keep plugging.
It's like lifting weights.
Yes,
you
it
can't
is.
Just
I
stop.
do my push-ups, but don't ask for Swanee tonight.
Tell me something. If I were Judy Garland sitting here and you had a chance to interview me, what would you like to ask her?
It's when the first book on Garland came out in '92, Joan Rivers had her show, and I did it with a Betty Davis author, I think, and a Marilyn Monroe author, and they were on talking about Marilyn's fatal enema and this drug problem and this tragedy and Fergie and Lady Di and bulimia, and the studio audience was just sitting there.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I came on for the last 2 minutes. They showed a minute clip of Judy singing, and the temperature just rose. And when she hit the last high note in Hello Bluebird, the place went berserk. And Joan Rivers looked at me and said, she sure holds up, doesn't she? Sorry, long story. But at the end, Joan asked each author, if you could ask your subject any question, what would you ask them? And somebody wanted to take Lady Di to lunch, and somebody wanted to take Marilyn to Palm Springs, and fine. I said, I would ask her if I got it right. Because that, as much of a fan as I have been and will always be, I've got the journalism background, the journalism degree. I want to be, there's enough passion in me to want to get it to be respected as a writer and as a researcher and as a historian, to use the word you were nice enough to use at the top. And because there's been so much hooey written about her, and there had been long before I wrote about her. And most of those books, my saving grace was that I wanted to write about her career. I didn't want to write about husbands and hospitalizations and prescriptions. That had been done badly often. That's not to malign the other authors, but so many of them wrote about her in the decade or so after she died when you couldn't tell the truth. There were too many people who were still alive and powerful and litigious. And you couldn't talk about Freddie Fields and David Beagleman, screwing over. You couldn't talk about Sid Luft not paying the taxes and leaving her $400,000 in debt.
Speaking of litigious.
Thank you. Yeah, because I worked for Sid for a year, and really? I saw all the inner workings. So the new book, which is primarily about her film career, there is a 30-page biography that kicks it off, and even though I've done 2 prior books, this is the first time I've been able to write a biography section on her where everybody's dead. I can tell the truth.
And you do.
I try.
And the book is absolutely wonderful.
Thank you, sir.
It's Judy, a Legendary Film Career by John Fricke. And it really is. It's just, there are pictures in here, there's text in here that's just sensational, stuff that I've never seen before. John, thanks so much for being with us.
Anytime. I've been looking forward to doing this for a long time, Jim.
And thank you for being with us. It's always nice to see you. I hope we'll see you next time as we continue to remember. Thanks.